They laughed when the Earthling crawled out wearing a bush. Broadcasts replayed it across 9 star systems. A two-legged joke draped in rotting green rags, dragging twigs behind him like a child's failed science project. The Omni Strike squad roared with laughter as they checked their stealth cloaks and plasma railguns. One called him Swamp Pet. Another said, "Give it water, maybe it'll grow sense." But 72 hours later the laughter stopped. The camera feeds cut out. No one came back. The only sound left was a soft whisper in the tall grass of a world with no wind. They said it was impossible for an Earth soldier to compete. Not in the Galactic War Games, where only the deadliest across the cosmos were chosen. Earth, a backwater dirtball with a long-forgotten military history, had only one slot. So they sent Stitch. No one knew why he was called that until later. Until the silence stitched itself across the mouths of every fool who mocked him. The intergalactic arena hovered over planet Virex 9, an artificial warzone designed to simulate all known climates and terrains. That year they went with barren rock and open plains, an intentional insult. Omnistrike had pulled strings. The terrain was designed to expose Stitch, to make a show of his death. Their captain viewer smirked during the pre-match briefing, staring at Stitch through a translator lens. "You wear leaves." Viewer sneered. Stitch didn't answer. He just rubbed some mud across his cheekbone and chewed on what might have been a beetle. An audience of 10 billion watched from across the stars as the teams were dropped in. 10 from Omnistrike. 1 from Earth. An old man in a mossy rug. The first 12 hours were broadcast gold. Omnistrike played to the cameras, waving, joking, peeing on rocks with visible disregard for their surroundings. Stitch. He was gone. The broadcast kept cutting back to his locator feed. Flat, motionless, a single heartbeat every few seconds. Commentators speculated he'd died of fright or was playing dead for sympathy votes. One said Earth had confused a corpse with a sniper. At hour 13 it happened. The feed from squadmate Krelo's helmet snapped to static. One blink he was there mid-sentence mocking the dirt man. The next his view tilted sideways, spun, then froze with a soft crunching sound. No plasma signature. No movement. Just a small puff of displaced dirt in the distance. "What the hell was that?" asked the host. "Nothing." Silence. The audience leaned in. No one else seemed to see anything. No muzzle flash, no tracer line. Omnistrike panicked but tried to laugh it off. Stitch's heart rate didn't spike. Still one beat. Every 6 seconds. By hour 16 another was gone. Then another. Squadmate Piran vanished while drinking from his own hydration pack. One frame he was joking about how Stitch probably thought he was a rock. The next a shadow behind him. Then nothing. Not even a scream. It was no longer entertainment. It was an extermination. Not fast, not flashy, surgical. Psychological. One by one Stitch removed them like a man peeling the bark off a log to see what twitched underneath. The galaxy was watching the collapse of an empire, and they loved it. Omnistrike's tech couldn't detect him. Their thermal sensors were useless. The cloak fields didn't matter. Stitch had spent a decade living in Earth's worst jungles, deserts, tundras. He'd trained to shoot between heartbeats and wait longer than most species could stay sane. One time he stayed motionless in a puddle for 3 days, just to shoot a convoy that didn't even come. By the end of day 1 only 6 remained. Omnistrike tried forming tight groups, using scanners, drones, even calling for disqualification on grounds of paranormal engagement. The war game judges laughed that one off. No rules were broken. No foul play. Just one Earthman hunting in silence. One moment from the second day went viral. The Omnistrike squad set a trap faking distress signals to draw Stitch out. Instead they returned to find their own perimeter surrounded with 15 tripwire-triggered spike pits. Medieval. They mocked the Earthman again, until one of the spikes exploded upward and impaled Virar's second-in-command through 3 lungs. Broadcasts began to spin narratives. Earth's primitive genius. The Whisper Sniper. Is this the end of Omnistrike? Children wore ghillie suits to school. Memes flooded the datanet. One just showed a patch of grass with the caption, "He's here." By day 3 only 2 of them remained. Virar and a jittery trooper named Zev. They hadn't slept. They heard whispers in their sleep, scratched at leaves that weren't there. One of their cameras caught a figure for half a second, just a head draped in green in the middle of a rocky slope. It blinked, then vanished. Veer screamed into the comms. He's not human. He's something in between. Then Zev's feed cut. A soft thump. A gasp. His gun fell to the dirt and fired randomly into the sky. The shot hit a bird. The bird died. The silence returned. Veer tried everything. He activated an orbital drone. It scanned the area 3 times, detected no movement. Except for one anomaly, a patch of dirt that seemed warmer than the rest. By the time the drone zoomed in, the heat signature was gone. Anvirar's left boot was missing. Not his leg. Just the boot. When he turned around, it was sitting on a rock. Clean. Polished. Tied in a neat little bow. He began to cry. Stitch was a ghost. A crawling shadow. A man from a forgotten planet who killed not with power but with patience. He didn't just eliminate his targets. He erased them. Made their squad doubt each other. Doubt the ground. The air. Themselves. At the final broadcast checkpoint, Veer sat alone, wide-eyed, muttering ancient earth curses he should not have known. He looked directly into the camera and said, "We mocked the Bushmen. Now we live in fear of every leaf." The signal cut. The war games ended. Omni Strike, defeated. Earth, undefeated. Dominic Stitch, Mallory emerged 3 days later, dragging a blanket of leaves behind him. He looked straight into the lens, grinned and said, "Good dirt out there." He disappeared again before they could interview him. Galactic Command still doesn't know where Stitch went. But everywhere across the stars, soldiers flinch when the wind moves wrong. And somewhere on a silent hill beneath an alien moon, something lies still, watching. The thing about Stitch was that he didn't fight like the rest of them. He didn't believe in moving fast. He didn't believe in tech. He didn't even believe in fairness. Stitch believed in silence. He believed in blending in so deeply with the world around him that even the air gave up trying to find him. While Omnistrike tore through the arena in formation, barking commands and checking sensors, Stitch was somewhere beneath their feet, listening. He wasn't just hiding. He was sinking into the planet like a root. And that made him unstoppable. Back on Earth, the old military instructors used to joke that the best snipers were born half dirt. Stitch took that to heart. In his journal, recovered much later, one line stood out among the chaos. "Cloaks hide you from cameras. Mud hides you from gods." That was the difference. Omnistrike had their shimmering cloaking fields, photon distortion generators, heat suppression armor, things with flashing lights and digital readouts. Stitch had a ratty suit of burlap, moss and filth, soaked in natural oils and sweat, that reeked like a swamp funeral. But unlike their high-tech suits, his couldn't be hacked or short-circuited. His disguise was not a piece of gear. It was a state of mind. Omnistrike didn't understand it, which is why they kept dying. The next phase of the arena adjusted terrain automatically. After realizing they were being picked off too quickly, the galactic officiators decided to help the remaining soldiers by adding a more complex terrain zone. Simulated jungle Earth style with humid air, dense trees, vines and artificial insects. They figured it would be neutral terrain, unfamiliar to everyone. But for Stitch it was home. As the Omnistrike squad trudged through the thickening forest, sweat rolling under their helmets and sensors constantly pinging false positives from foliage, Stitch moved like a ghost. Not a sound. Not a snap of a twig. Just air, barely disturbed, passing between leaves like he belonged there more than gravity did. At one point, 2 soldiers from the squad split off from the main group. They were chasing a false signal. One Stitch had planted by leaving a discarded ration pack wrapped in a reflective foil blanket. As they approached the clearing, one of them joked nervously that they hadn't seen anything move that wasn't digital in hours. The other one lifted a branch and suddenly vanished. Just gone. The camera feed cut to static again. The remaining soldier started screaming into the comms, shooting wildly into the foliage. His shots hit nothing but vines and air. He spun around, breathing heavily, and then stopped. In the reflection of his own visor he saw a second set of eyes. Inches away. And then the feed was gone. Back at command, galactic broadcasters tried to make sense of it. Military tacticians argued over how Stitch could remain undetectable. Some said he had tech Earth hadn't declared. Others claimed he was a biological experiment. One theory went viral. Stitch was dead, a vengeful spirit wandering the arena with unfinished business. But none of those were true. Stitch wasn't anything special. He was just prepared in ways others weren't. One Omni-Strike survivor finally gave a shaky interview via audio-only feed. He said he had found a boulder that looked suspicious, too smooth, oddly placed. So he scanned it. It came back negative. When he stepped around it, he found another soldier's helmet sitting perfectly in the middle of the path, filled with sand. On the boulder was a single word, smeared in mud: closer. He never found Stitch, but he found 3 more helmets. Each one positioned like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. By the time he returned to his squad, half of them were gone. Stitch's booby traps were laughable by galactic standards. Tripwires made from braided plant fiber. Slingshots using bent branches. At one point, a camouflaged pit with sharpened sticks, actual sticks, took down a 4-limbed alien with thermal armor. When Omni-Strike found the trap, one of them sputtered, "This is barbaric." The next second, his gun was yanked from his hand by a vine noose and flung 30 feet into the trees. They spent the next hour arguing about physics, declaring it must have been a drone. But Stitch didn't use drones. He had time. And boredom. And patience like a sharpened knife. There was one surreal moment captured by a stationary satellite drone. It showed an open field where nothing moved for 6 minutes. Then faintly something in the grass shifted. Not a figure, just the grass itself tilting 1 degree against the wind. A shadow passed, impossible to track. A single shot cracked through the feed and then silence. Later, that feed became mandatory viewing in interplanetary sniper training. In a moment that bordered on comedy, Omni-Strike's tech officer decided to rig up a ground-based sonar pulse to flush Stitch out. The logic was simple. Blast the terrain with low-frequency waves and force any living thing to move. The moment the pulse activated, they were hit with a barrage of pre-recorded Earth animal sounds. Bears, wolves, some chicken clucks for good measure. It overwhelmed their sensors. Stitch wasn't hiding. He was toying with them. Inside the arena, Stitch was talking to himself. Not out loud. Never out loud, but in his head. He called the trees by name. He thanked the puddles. When he took a shot, he said a little rhyme to himself. 1 breath in, 1 breath out, the wind don't lie, the dirt don't shout. Kept him calm. Focused. Detached. Meanwhile, Omni-Strike was unraveling. The surviving soldiers became paranoid, suspecting each other of feeding Stitch information. Their captain, Vur, slapped one of his men mid-mission. Another soldier swore he saw Stitch crawling along the ceiling of the trees like some nightmare. They tried using infrared ultrasonic pings, EM pulses. All it did was make the arena angrier. One drone finally caught a brief silhouette, only a head half covered in twigs, emerging from a pile of leaves. It blinked. The drone exploded 3 seconds later. Whether Stitch shot it or it short-circuited in fear, no one could confirm. The remaining squad members began to sleep in shifts, setting perimeter alarms that stitched themselves together in glowing nets. They used every tool at their disposal. So they disappeared. One after another. No screams. Just gear left behind. Neatly stacked as if out of respect. Or insult. And Stitch? He ate worms. Drank from dew. Slept once, buried under moss with a single leaf over his mouth to keep his breath from giving him away. He wrote 3 new entries in his journal. One was just a tally mark. The next said, "Their captain's scared now." Good. The third was more poetic. "They mocked the mud. Now they sleep in it." By the end of day 2, only 3 members of Omni-Strike remained. Their morale was shattered. One muttered to himself constantly. Another stopped wearing his helmet because he swore it whispered back at him. Viewer stopped speaking entirely. He just stared at the tree, lean, eyes wide, rifle always aimed low, toward the ground where the leaves rustled even when there was no wind. The final transmission from day 2 was a single phrase, barely audible, mumbled by one of the survivors into a cracked mic before the line went dead. "We should have brought a bush." Omni-Strike had run out of pride by day 3. The elite unit once hailed as the deadliest force in 6 galaxies was reduced to 3 trembling figures clinging to rocks and whispering into malfunctioning comms. Their armor was scratched, scorched, and half of it had been stripped off to avoid making noise. Gone were the confident strides and synchronized scans. Now they crawled, shuffling through the underbrush like prey in a world they thought they'd control. The irony? This was the very team that once bragged about taking down a Cothalan war titan in 17 seconds. But that was a loud victory. Their current enemy didn't give them a battle. He gave them silence and they didn't know how to fight that. Captain Viewer stood at the center of what was supposed to be their extraction point. He checked the sky every 6 minutes, praying for a ship that wouldn't come. The Galactic War Game Protocol required the match to continue until the last operative was incapacitated or surrendered. No one had ever needed the surrender clause before. Most teams didn't live long enough to ask for mercy. Omnistrike still hadn't said the word, but it hung in the air unspoken and heavy. The AI that managed the arena, Arena Core 9, made a judgment call based on battlefield psychology. It altered the terrain again. This time not to help Stitch, but to give the others a chance to fight him. Arena Core assumed they wanted to root out the Earth sniper, so it loaded a simulation patch and dropped in artificial structures, wide-open corridors, clean lines of sight and motion-sensitive floodlights. A synthetic city block rose from the plains overnight. It was an urban jungle with only one twist. No trees. No grass. No mud. No cover. Just angles and walls. The perfect counter-sniper zone. Stitch didn't flinch. While the rest moved into the new zone, Stitch took a different path. He skirted the perimeter for an hour, watching from a ledge like a ghost pacing the edge of its own grave. He wasn't angry at the terrain change. He was amused. Because Arena Core didn't understand that Stitch didn't need trees. Trees were convenient. Not necessary. He'd once survived a sniper trial inside a concrete prison with no power, 2 bullets, and a fire alarm that went off every 20 seconds. Compared to that, this was a luxury resort. Virar and the remaining 2 soldiers began mapping the new city for ambush points. They were more careful now, too careful. Every step they took was measured, every doorway they crossed scanned multiple times. They covered each other's blind spots, whispered instead of talking. But it didn't matter. They weren't preparing for a sniper. They were preparing for something human. Stitch had become something else. His movements were so slow they didn't register as movement. He didn't run. He seeped into spaces. When he struck, it wasn't with anger or noise. It was with decision. One of the soldiers, Eric Shaw, the youngest of the 3, was the first to crack. She saw her own reflection in a window and screamed. In her panic, she fired twice into the glass, then dropped her rifle. Viewer shouted for her to calm down, but she didn't respond. She ran into a nearby building and sealed the door behind her. Viewer tried to follow but found the keypad sabotaged. When he accessed the external cam feed to check on her, the screen showed only static for 3 seconds. Then it cut to black. He never came back out. The AI tried to assist again. It deployed hovering light drones to track unusual heat signatures. All they found were rats. Dozens of small rodents scattered across rooftops. It seemed absurd until one feed zoomed in and found each rat with a tiny scrap of cloth tied around its torso. Jungle-patterned cloth. It was a joke. Stitch had trained the drones to chase ghosts. That was the moment Viewer stopped believing in odds. The man in the moss wasn't just hunting. He was playing. Later that afternoon, the city rang out with sound for the first time in hours. It was music. Classical earth piano, echoing through empty alleyways. Veer followed the sound, weapon drawn, nerves twitching. He found a rusted speaker mounted to a broken vending machine. Inside the coin slot was a note. Not digital. Handwritten. It said, "Stillness is louder than you think." Veer threw the note and fired into the speaker. The music stopped. The fear didn't. As the sun simulation dipped low and the artificial night settled in, the last 2 soldiers decided to set a final trap. They baited Stitch with a holographic distress signal, rigged with proximity mines. It looked real. It even smelled real, using chemical scents pulled from old Earth field kits. They hid and waited. An hour passed. Then a third. The signal kept beeping. Their patience waned. Then finally movement. A figure limped into view, green, bulky, ghillie draped. It approached the signal, hunched. They held their breath, fingers trembling on detonators. The figure stopped. It didn't move again. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Was it frozen? Was it bait? Then it deflated. The figure collapsed inward like a tent, revealing sticks, leaves, and stitched clothing padded with rocks. Another note fluttered out. This one read, "Nice try." Before they could react, a shadow dropped from above and took the second soldier in complete silence. Viewer turned just in time to see her vanish into a pile of refuse. No scream. No fight. Just gone. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't move. He stood in the center of the city square, turning in slow circles, waiting. A voice came from the shadows at dawn, low and dry. You talk too much. Viewer spun and fired. The bullet struck nothing. His HUD scrambled. His helmet powered down. When he ripped it off, he found a smear of mud across the visor from the inside. It hadn't been there before. He dropped the helmet and stood there, shaking, breathing in shallow gasps. Stitch didn't kill him that day. He left Viewer for last. To regret. To understand. And as Viewer sat on the edge of a steel platform, watching the light drones flicker above an empty city, he whispered the one thing Omnistrike had never said before. Mercy. But mercy wasn't the rule here. Silence was. And somewhere behind him, just out of sight, the bush moved. Viewer hadn't spoken in hours. Not since the other soldier vanished. Not since the trap failed. He'd stopped running calculations, stopped trusting his HUD, stopped believing in the idea that he was a soldier anymore. Soldiers fought wars. He was prey in a proving ground with no mercy. The silence surrounding him wasn't peaceful. It was judgmental. It breathed. It waited. Every time he blinked, he felt eyes watching. Not from a screen or through a lens, but from the ground itself. The walls seemed closer now. The shadows deeper. The city that Arena Core had spawned for them to use as cover had turned into a cage. And somewhere in that cage, Stitch was still crawling, still waiting, still breathing without sound. Viewer had one plan left, and even that felt like desperation, trying to wear confidence as a mask. He would set a trap of his own. Not mechanical. Not electronic. Something Stitch would appreciate. Something ancient. He smeared himself in mud. Real mud, not synthetic. He stripped off the last of his powered armor, leaving only the fabric base layer clinging to his skin. It was absurd, but part of him believed the sniper wouldn't shoot someone who looked too much like himself. Maybe if he played the part of the predator, he would finally earn Stitch's respect. Or die pretending. He moved into the hollowed-out ruin of a simulated courthouse. A high tower with fractured walls and cracked stone staircases. There he placed a dummy in his own discarded armor, positioning it in front of a cracked window, just slightly visible from outside. Then he waited on the rooftop, rifle aimed at the shadows below. The idea was simple. Stitch would shoot the dummy, reveal his position, and Viewer would return fire. But after hours, the dummy remained untouched. Viewer began to doubt even that. What if Stitch had already found him? What if he was lying inches away, waiting for Viewer to reveal something, anything worth striking? Then came the sound. Not loud. Not obvious. Just a soft scrape. Stone against stone, faint like a pebble rolling across concrete. Viewer turned sharply, rifle sweeping, but nothing was there. So he adjusted. Scanned again. Another scrape, but now behind him. He turned back and froze. The dummy was gone. Not shot. Gone. Armor removed. Window still cracked, but now empty. He looked down and saw a neat pile of the dummy's components placed at the base of the courthouse steps. As if folded. Presented. Viewer's own helmet sat atop the stack like a gravestone. He backed away, hands shaking. Stitch had been here. Close. Inside even. Viewer hadn't heard a door open. Hadn't seen a shadow pass. But the sniper had walked straight into the trap, disassembled it, and left a message. You're not the hunter. You're the hunted. The pressure built in Viewer's chest like fire trapped in a canister. He screamed, not in rage but in raw, exhausted terror. He didn't care who heard anymore. There was no point in whispering. No point in subtlety. Stitch already knew where he was. Knew what he'd tried. Knew the depth of his fear and the shallowness of his last hope. Viewer kicked over a bench and sat on the cold floor, sweat pouring down his face, dripping onto the polished rifle that had never once fired a meaningful shot in this game. That night, something shifted in the sky. The arena's atmosphere, usually artificial and perfectly controlled, showed signs of incoming storm simulation. Thunder rolled far off in the distance and a false wind began to stir. Viewer didn't know whether it was random chance or Stitch's influence. All he knew was that this silence would soon be filled with something worse. Disruption, confusion, the kind of chaos in which Stitch thrived. He prepared himself mentally. There would be no extraction. No end until one of them stopped breathing. He made peace with the idea that it wouldn't be Stitch. He left the courthouse, walking slowly down the stone steps. Every shadow in the simulated city now felt like it belonged to someone else. He made his way to the city square again, where it had all unraveled, and sat in the middle with no weapon in his hands. He didn't want to die fighting anymore. He just wanted to understand. Then he heard it. Not a scrape. Not a crunch. A voice. Soft, low from behind. You lasted longer than I thought. VR turned slowly. Stitch stood just 5 meters away, completely uncovered, Ghillie draped around his shoulders like a second skin, face streaked with dried mud and sweat. He looked older than VR remembered. Not aged. Worn. Like the earth itself had molded him over years of pressure and stillness. VR didn't raise his weapon. He couldn't. His arms were too heavy. Why didn't you kill me earlier? VR asked, voice dry. Stitch didn't smile. He never did. Because you weren't scared enough to listen. VR nodded, almost laughing, but it came out as a cough. He stood slowly, unarmed, and walked forward a step. You think this proves Earth is better? He asked. Stitch looked at him for a long time and for once answered. No. It proves quiet is better. Then he stepped forward, not with a gun, not with a blade, but with something small. He tossed it. VR caught it. It was a cracked military patch, his own, sewn to a square of moss-stained cloth. You mocked us, Stitch said, but Earth remembers. VR opened his mouth to respond, but his body froze. Pain lanced through his spine, subtle, almost elegant. He looked down. A small dart had embedded itself in his side. No sound. No launch. No visible weapon. It had just appeared. He dropped to his knees, vision flickering. Stitch knelt beside him. This isn't personal, he said quietly. But someone needed to remember what patience feels like. VR's last thought before the world faded was not of war or glory, but of grass. Real grass, swaying in a breeze. Earth's silence. The kind he'd once mocked. His body was recovered a week later, untouched, preserved in perfect stillness, as if even death had paused to honor the quiet. His helmet had been placed in his lap. Inside it was one last note. You laughed at the leaves. They buried you kindly. The war games ended without fanfare. There was no final announcement, no crowd roaring, no victory parade. Just a blank feed. One moment the live broadcast had been following Captain VR's last steps in the simulated city, the viewers breathless and leaning in. Then the screen went black. A simple message blinked for a few seconds. Contest concluded. That was it. Billions of spectators across the galaxy stared in stunned silence. There had never been a match like it. Not only had an entire elite squad vanished, but they had been taken down by a single human. One soldier from Earth, dressed in moss and dirt, had dismantled 10 of the most advanced warriors known to the interstellar community. And he'd done it without fanfare, without a speech, without even being seen properly. Some called it poetic. Others called it terrifying. A few refused to believe it had happened at all. Back on Earth, the reaction was different. At first there was confusion. The War Games feed had cut, and Earth's representative was never formally declared the winner. But then footage began to surface. Clips and fragments. Helmet cam glitches. Audio logs. Unreleased drone feeds. Together they painted a picture so strange and compelling that Earth didn't need a medal. They had something better. They had a legend. Young cadets started imitating the way Stitch moved, practicing silence drills in forests and wetlands, crawling through mud with leaves in their hair. Recruitment numbers doubled in the first week. Then tripled. Schools requested ghillie suits for physical education. Even civilians started quoting Stitch's lines. One went viral, "You mocked the mud. Now you live in it." Printed on shirts, tattooed on arms, sprayed on walls from Detroit to Delhi. The Galactic Council, not knowing what to do, held a meeting in private chambers to review the match. For the first time in history, they couldn't find a rules violation to explain Omnistrike's total failure. Every shot Stitch fired had been within the regulation guidelines. Every trap had been legal. Every disappearance, while unusual, was recorded and time-stamped. The final report simply read, "Victory Earth." No embellishment. No ceremony. Just fact. Stitch, however, was nowhere to be found. He hadn't returned with the retrieval pods. His locator beacon had gone offline 24 hours after the match ended. Search drones combed the arena for days. They found nothing. Not even footprints. Only the helmet of Captain Vuur, resting on a rock with a message inside. You laughed at the leaves. They buried you kindly. No one knew how the message had been written. The helmet had no prints, no traceable data. Just a pen mark and perfectly preserved handwriting. Galactic media tried to spin the story at first. They aired roundtable debates questioning if Stitch had used forbidden technology, if Earth had somehow hacked the arena's AI, if the game had been rigged. But the evidence just wouldn't support it. Instead, the narrative shifted. They began to call him the Ghost of Earth, the Green Death, the Ghillie Reaper. One network aired a dramatized series about him, complete with exaggerated scenes showing Stitch talking to trees and riding an alien bear into battle. None of it was accurate, but it didn't matter. The myth had taken root. Stitch had become more than a sniper. He had become an idea. Earth's military, meanwhile, tried to give Stitch a posthumous medal. They couldn't confirm if he was dead, but they assumed he was lost. A ceremony was held. No body. Just a pile of stitched burlap and a photo of Stitch from years ago. In the picture he was barely smiling, a leaf stuck in his beard, eyes already distant like he saw something beyond the camera. Officials gave speeches. One general tried to describe Stitch's service record but stopped after listing only 2 missions. Neither had official endings. Both were marked unresolved. When the crowd grew silent, the general finished the speech by placing a single leaf on the empty podium. No one clapped. They just stood in the silence he taught them to respect. Elsewhere in the galaxy, strange things began to happen. A pirate ship known for raiding supply routes vanished in a jungle on a remote moon. The only thing left was a helmet, propped up on a spear of bark. A mercenary unit sent to investigate a derelict base returned with 2 fewer members and a single phrase etched into their drop pod: "Stillness sees everything." Rumors swirled. Some believed Stitch had never left the arena. Others thought he had begun hunting again, this time choosing his own wars. A few believed he had retired and now lived as part of the land, somewhere in the deep wilds of a forgotten world. Wherever he was, no one could find him. And most had stopped trying. On one particularly strange evening, a new squad of elite mercenaries gathered on a desert moon to train. They had heard the Stitch stories, of course, but laughed them off. They wore shimmering new cloaks and advanced sensory equipment. One of them joked that if the Mudman showed up, he'd just get flash-fried by anti-personnel drones. Another mocked Earth's primitive gear, holding up a roll of burlap and saying it looked like someone's laundry. That night, during a low-light drill, one of their motion trackers picked up an anomaly. Faint. No heat. No noise. Just a single momentary shift in the sand, like a breath that came from below. The squad paused. They checked their gear. Nothing appeared. But the next morning 2 of them were gone. Their boots were still in camp. Their weapons untouched. Where their sleeping mats had been, someone had drawn a crude image in the dust. A leaf. Nothing more. Just a single leaf. That squad never finished their contract. They requested extraction and refused to speak of what they saw. One filed a report that simply said, "I think he's watching. We should never have laughed." Back on Earth, deep in a quiet forest far from satellites and cities, there's a clearing where the moss grows thicker than it should. No animals enter it. No drones scan it. It's just there, soft and untouched, like the planet itself is holding its breath. Sometimes hikers claim they see a figure standing at the edge. Just a shape. Nothing clear. Always draped in green. Never moving. When they blink, the figure's gone. Locals have a name for him now, passed down between campfire stories and whispered warnings. They don't call him a hero. They just say if you feel the forest go still all of a sudden, don't speak. Don't run. Don't even blink. Just respect the silence. Might be his.